Hi, it's Shell, your local Knuckles fan, SA2 fan, and all-around Sonic maniac. But Halloween is finally upon us, which means it's time for tricks, treats, and just any and all things spooky, including this video right here. Now, I'd say the Sonic series is quite familiar with having its spooky locales, from your Mystic Mansions to your Sandopolis says, but Sonic Adventure 2 is a game that really shines in its spookiness. There's a term I came up with a couple of years back called a spook factor, which in the most basic terms pretty much just refers to what makes something spooky. And I'd like to dive into all the things that do that with this game in particular. So, if you're familiar with Sonic Adventure 2, you're probably expecting me to start off with the level you're seeing on screen right now. I mean this right here, it's probably the first thing that comes to mind when you think of spooky Sonic levels. But I think I'd like to hold off on it for just a bit, because that's just it, it's the obvious example. In a way, this level is probably as iconic to Knuckles as Green Hill is to Sonic. And even still, there are a few things I'd like to go over first anyway, so let's get to that, with our first stop being directly east to pay our good buddy Shadow a visit down at Skyrail. Now spoilers, but at this point of the story, the dark side of the Force has collected 6 out of the 7 Chaos Emeralds, and newsflash, guess who has the 7th? And so Rouge sets out in her Batmobile to track down the Fox Boy and give chase. Once she catches up, the player is given all the information they need to know.
Shadow, they're in that blue plane. Spotted at 11 o'clock.
Copy that. I'm in pursuit.
Now, just starting out on the level, there's a few spooky things I could point out. Mainly pumpkins, there's a lot of those, but first I want to show you this tree. Its branches sort of look like arms, that's cool, right? This tree will be important later, you'll see. Though for more plainly spooky things, we got quite a few patterns to look at. Starting with this ledge, it's got a cool skull/skeleton pattern, which, you know, skulls, death, spooky. But we go a little further and we can find another skull pattern on this wheel thing, which you can also find here, 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 and a whole bunch of other places. Though we can also see a few other ledge types right at the start, including this pumpkin pattern and this ghost pattern that'll lead us right to our next thing, these other spinning wheels with a jack-o'-lantern hub. Got a pretty similar hub on these fans littered about the stage as well, but that's enough of just listing stuff off. I think it's time we actually start progressing a bit in the level. So after going down these rails and around this mountain, we can use the Mystic Melody upgrade to make a trail of rings, and at the top there's some more spooky stuff. Well, really just these scarecrows, but this is the place to find them. After that, we finally reach what I'm going to call the pumpkin pillars. I also thought of Jacko pillars, tell me which one you like more. But you can homing attack your way onto this one to get some rewards on the one next to it. They're cool. Anyway, back to patterns. On the next landmass, you can find some spider and skull wall patterns, which is pretty cool. There's also a chapel on top, though we'll get back to that later because there's a tree next to it. There's not much of the stage left to talk about. All I really got to mention are these metal skulls that are supposed to breathe fire, but I'm playing the PC version so you can't see that. They can still hurt you though. That's pretty much it for Skyrail. A cutscene placed to inform the player that the Doctor plans to give the heroes a warm welcome at his base, which closes off this level for good. But since we're done, now is it now. I'd actually like to go in chronological order from here on out, so let's head backwards to the first event in our spooky timeline with...
This is Rouge. I've located Eggman's base and will proceed to enter it now. I hate to say it. I guess I'm going to have to find that key first.
There's a reason I decided to start off with Skyrail, and that's because it's the only one of these levels not to feature. Boo! Oh man, oh boy, it's the boos, oh the boos. And yes, they're called boos. You might also be familiar with the name Boom Boos, but that's because there are 3 distinct types of this enemy in the game. Though if you're wondering, this level only features the one of them, so we'll get there when we get there. From here on out, just about every stage I'm going to mention is what we can call a haunted level due to the presence of these ghosts. But let's talk about these things a bit more. I was actually introduced to them through what was my favorite show at the time, Sonic X. And they're actually what got me to stop watching this show altogether. These things terrified me as a kid, especially when they possessed Amy later in the episode. This was nightmare fuel to my 6-year-old brain. But yeah, I'm not 6 anymore, and these guys just kinda look goofy to me now. However, on their in-game behavior, a couple come out to jump scare you in certain spots, but there's not much to say beyond that. For the ones that don't, just a kick in the face and you're good. Of course, there is a good amount of Egyptian imagery throughout the level. This is a haunted pyramid after all, but a lot of that isn't what I'd call traditionally spooky. Like yeah, there's scorpions and cobras, but there are definitely no spiders and skeletons. These Eggman faces do add a bit to the spookiness though. Speaking of skeletons, there's a few skulls on the walls surrounding the egg cobra which add a bit to the spook. There's also an element of hide and seek, I'd say, with this patrolling beetle robot attacking you if you're not in the shade when you occupy the same room. But I think that's about it when it comes to headquarters. Alright, fine. Pumpkin Hill. Since we just looked at it, you might notice that this is pretty much just Skyrail but at a different time of day. And well, you know, they're in the same region, so that checks out. But yeah, this stage has got a bunch of the same patterns, got a few new ones though, like these slabs of metal used to connect the different floating islands, as well as this like Batman logo in a few spots too. There's another one I'll get back to in a bit, but hey, you remember those trees? Well, they got faces now. In fact, the whole stage is kind of just a haunted Skyrail. Here, let me go over the geography real quick. There are 5 of those pumpkin pillars hanging around the stage, and there are also 3 major mountains here. Pumpkin Mountain, Church Mountain, and Ghost Train Mountain. Pumpkin Mountain has a whole bunch of actual pumpkins on it. Ghost Train Mountain has a ghost train, as well as that other pattern I mentioned earlier under its tracks. Though Church Mountain is the one that interests me, as yes, it has a church, but there's also a whole cemetery right next to it, with a boo just hanging around. You want to talk your spooky implications, this part has got you covered. On a few items I haven't mentioned yet, we've got the scarecrows back from Skyrail, which is neat. But there's a bunch of actual skulls just littered about the stage, with some of them hanging on these sharp fences. You can also find a few in these skull huts on the different mountains. Anyway, for our last thing, I'd be remiss to neglect to mention the track that plays over the stage, A Ghost Pumpkin Soup. The lyrics add a bit to the spook factor, and I think I let them speak for themselves.
I can't see a thing, but it's around somewhere. I'm gonna hold my head, cause I have no fear. This probably seems crazy, a graveyard theory. Our ghosts try to approach me and got leery. Ask him a question and he vanished in a second. I'm walking through valleys, crying pumpkins in the alley. Didn't seem happy, but they sure tried to get me. Had to back them up with a fist metal crackle. I'm hearing someone saying, you a chicken, don't be scared. It had to be the wind, cause nobody wasn't there. I searched and I searched as I climbed up the wall. And then I started to fly, I went in deeper. Let it get to me, I'm just going.
There's not a lot to say about Aquatic Mine. It's a haunted mine. You got your boos, you got your skulls, you got one mention of skulls in the lyrics, but that's kinda it. Here are all the new patterns we got, but I'm not gonna dwell on the returning stuff like I did with Pumpkin Hill. I'd actually like to transition over to the Chao Garden. First, there are a bunch of spooky animals you can give the Chao. Vultures, bats, but the most interesting of them has to be the skeleton dog, which is easiest to find in the Pumpkin Hill Cemetery. When given to the Chao, it can take away different animal parts they may have adopted, but it also gives them the ability to have headwear, which is fairly neat. Speaking of the Chao, there's also alignment, which has the hero, neutral, and dark forms based on how they're raised. Dark is the most obviously spooky, but getting Chao on different alignments also unlocks 2 extra gardens, with dark unlocking, of course, the Dark Garden. This is probably the spookiest area in the game. I mean, you've got a pool of blood, skulls, tombstones, a dead tree, a monkey. Oh wait, I brought that in here. This place has got the works. Fine place to raise a child, wouldn't you say? But that's the spook factor of the Chao Garden. There's also the 2-player mode to mention, and well, we've got a good amount to go into. First, we got a technically original level in Pool Quest, but it's effectively a watered down aquatic mine. Got all of the same patterns, there's not a lot to say. What I'm more interested in talking about are the 2-player exclusive characters, namely Tikal, Chaos, and Metal Sonic. Spoilers for the first Sonic adventure if you haven't played it yet, I guess. But Chaos and Tikal end that game by essentially ascending into the afterlife. It's kinda implied that they're dead, so yeah, that's kinda spooky. But something else that isn't very uncommon to see in a spooky light is religion. And one of Tikal's idol animations just so happens to be her praying, so maybe? I don't know, it really depends on how far you want to stretch this spook factor stuff. She also has a special ability titled Heaven's Justice, which I thought was worth mentioning. I brought up Metal Sonic 2, but he's a killer robot, enough said. There are also 2-player versions of each of the stages I've talked about so far, but there's really nothing new to add there. Before we get back on track with the story, there's still one more thing for me to mention. If you didn't know, the Sega Dreamcast was one of the first consoles capable of having DLC due to its ability to connect to the internet via dial-up. And back in October 2001, some Halloween DLC became downloadable through the VMU, offering some cool costumes. The thing is, I can't exactly show it on original hardware, so I'm actually going to be using the Dreamcast Characters mod available on Game Banana. I'll link it in the description so you can download it yourself. But on the costumes themselves, Sonic's got this jack-o'-lantern look with him wearing one as a mask and having a plain old pumpkin wrapped around his torso. This is one of the cooler ones for sure, so if I was ranking these, this one's definitely in the running for number 1. Shadows is a bit of a step down though, with him having a skeleton texture on his arms, legs, and body. Like, it's still cool, but nowhere near as fun as this. For the treasure hunting characters, sadly Knuckles has the same deal. Though I'd say his fur doesn't work nearly as well as Shadow's, as at least Shadow has the benefit of his sorta looking like a skeleton costume. Roots makes up for it though with this really nice witch outfit. I mean, for the spookiest animal of the cast, it shouldn't come as much surprise that the Halloween theme suits her well. Both mech shooting characters have a pumpkin theme, though it's hard to say which one I like more. Tails has got a couple jack-o'-lantern decals on the different parts of his mech, and I really like the mixture of orange and yellow on the paint job. I think it looks incredibly nice. Eggman though has just got a giant jack-o'-lantern for a mech. I love both, but I think I'll give Tails the edge. The colors really do seem to do a lot for me. Something kinda off topic I'd like to mention is just how much I like playing the game with these costumes on. Seeing Eggman running through Lost Colony with his pumpkin walker is a real treat. Same goes for Rouge in stages like Security Hall. Again, I love that outfit. Playing through these stages like this just adds a whole new layer of fun to what was already my favorite game. Also, if I had to rank them, this is probably what it'd look like. That about covers the DLC, but we've spent more than enough time away from the story, I'd say. So let's get back on track. The heroes are ready to start playing on the offensive as they break into Eggman's hidden base, with Tails making an entrance for Sonic and the gang as he leads the assault. Not much to say in terms of adding much to the spook factor. There's a pyramid in the distance, but that's about it. Though as always, the music's pretty awesome. Maybe awesome enough for me to make mention of spooky or not. As Sonic makes his way into the pyramid, it's not long until you see those good old ghosts. The pyramid's practically swarming with them. In this level, they're big fans of grabbing onto you and giving you a nice, great hug. Kind of an inconvenience, though no problem for a player running around as a blue blur. By the end of the level though, the crew stumble across a lock needing 3 keys, and of course our poor boy Knuckles is tasked with finding them. He just can't catch a break, can he? This level has a lot in common with Egg Quarters, though it's presumably set in the same pyramid, so that shouldn't come as much of a surprise. But one thing I'd like to get out of the way is this level finally shows us our second kind of boo, the Boom Boos, which you should be able to find in the center of the stage, as well as this little sub area. As opposed to your standard boo, these guys have soulless black eyes and a mouth that's stitched shut. They're also noticeably slower. To defeat them, they gotta be hit 3 times, twice to turn them into a regular boo, and 1 more to make them disappear for good. While we're still in the center, I wanted to mention that if you climb up to this contraption right here, you'll find Big the Cat trapped inside. I imagine that'd be pretty scary for someone such as himself. They're not nearly as scary as being prisoner on an island that's gonna end up like this within the next half hour. If you're wondering about the regular boos, there's no shortage of them here either. They seem to take a liking to the red echidna, not to mention that we've already seen quite a few of them in this pyramid before. The lyrics are pretty spooky too. But I mean, this stage is called Death Chamber. I went over Death back in Skyrail, of course this stage would add some spook. We may have just gotten our second boo type, but it's not long until we get to see our third.
Huh? Who's there? What the... a ghost?
I mean, his face says all. Knuckles may be rougher than the rest of them, but I don't think anyone wouldn't be scared out of their minds looking at this. Of course, just like a vampire, you may have noticed that the boos and boom boos are never found in sunlight, and maybe now we know why. With the power of vitamin D, Knuckles makes quick work of the Monarch, clearly a bit tired out afterwards, though as you may recall, it isn't exactly a secret to the Doctor that he's received some uninvited guests.
You little thieves! Did you really
Come and get some, Eggman.
Sonic!
He calls out to his servant, the Egg Golem, which definitely puts up a fight to the Blue Blur. Though as almost every machine the Doctor has built, a glaring weakness is clearly visible. Sonic, taking note of this, destroys the restraining mechanism, eliminating the Doctor's control. The now free and possibly possessed Egg Golem definitely isn't happy with the Doctor, turning on him immediately, resulting in a quick battle. After this point, the rest of the game takes a turn to the Space Colony arc, which I'm afraid will bring an end to our time together today. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Though before you go, I'd like to make you aware of something first. While I decided to upload a bit of a remake of an old video on my channel for the spooky season, a collab between myself and my good friend Icarus Magician will be going up on their channel in a couple of days. I'll be sure to have it in the end card when it's out, In it, we talk about the SpongeBob episode, I Was a Teenage Gary, so if you're interested, I'd say go check it out. Though outside of that, I don't really have much else to say, so if you celebrate it, have a happy Halloween.
Let it get to me, I'm just gon' creep down Pumpkin Hill, I got to find my lost piece. I know that it's here, I sense it in my feet. The great emerald's power allows me to feel. I can't see a thing, but it's around somewhere. I gotta hold my head, I have no fear. It probably seems crazy, a graveyard theory. A ghost try to approach me.